Can you hear? If I could have everyone take his and her seat, please. If everyone could get one more drink and find your way to a seat, we're going to get started with a few remarks. You guys don't turn them on yet. You're good. You're going to speak up here. Good to go. Everybody could take a seat. I'm Robin Strong, and it's my pleasure to introduce to you Chris Todd, who is hosting tonight's event and is a member of the board of our center, and it gives me great pleasure to ask him to come to the podium and get our program started. We will be brief, and let me turn it over to you, Chris.
Thank you. I'll pause. The Center for Contemporary Political Art is the brainchild of Charles Kraus. And Charles asked me to say a little bit about my background. My background is I'm a lawyer in Washington. I'm one of the 40,000 members of the Washington Bar. I was a federal prosecutor for a long time. First in Washington, I had a Watergate case. Then I came to New York for almost 10 years in the U.S. Attorney's Office here. And then I went back down to Washington with the Iran-Contra investigation. So my prosecutorial career covered from Watergate to Iran-Contra and writing part of the indictment of Oliver North. And then I've been in private practice in Washington for about 30 years. If you have any doubt that art can inspire people to correct social injustice and contribute to a better world, I give you Exhibit A, my favorite exhibit. The artist is Jerzy Januszewski, and this was a poster that he created in 1980 to support the Solidarity movement in Poland. And it was almost a decade later before communism was overthrown. But this became the voice and the symbol of the Solidarity movement, which eventually led to the election of Lech Walesa in Poland in 1990. And it was the end of communism. And I'm going to pause there and say that again, because the end of communism was historically one of the most important events probably ever in the history of the world, in my judgment, but certainly in the last 100 years. And this poster helped do that. And also, after Poland, the entire Eastern Bloc, Bulgaria, Romania, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, communism went away. And it was in good part because of what Jerzy Januszewski did. Now, right before the election, by the way, there was another young Polish artist that created a political poster, and you can barely see it, but it's up here, is Gary Cooper in High Noon, and this poster said, you know, in effect, vote down communism, but it said, it's high noon. And this room is in the Solidarity Museum in Gdansk, Poland, where Charles and I were lucky enough, well, I was lucky enough to be invited by him to see it and to attend some other parties in Gdansk. But this is just another example. This whole room is just the Solidarity posters in various forms and various ways that have been used in different countries and by different people to try to improve the lives of many people. Now, Charles Kraus. Charles Kraus, for my lights, is one of the more interesting people on the planet. After he went to Penn and went to graduate school at the Woodrow Wilson School in Princeton, he became a reporter for the Washington Post. And in 1978, a young reporter assigned to go down to Jonestown, to Guyana, with Congressman Leo Ryan, and they were waiting on the tarmac to take some people out. Jones' goons came around, killed Ryan, killed 3 other journalists, and a 4th person. There were 5 people that were murdered. Charles was standing, or was close to Congressman Ryan, got shot, fortunately played dead well, and survived that. When he got back to his hotel, where was the hotel? In Georgetown. He got a call from Ben Bradley, the editor of the Washington Post, you know, how are you, et cetera. But it didn't take him long to get to the point. Charles, you have a deadline. And that resulted in several articles thereafter. He was the pool reporter that went in. But you've all either used or read the phrase, the iconic phrase, they drank the Kool-Aid. Well, that's Charles Krause reporting on Jonestown. And then he went on to an award-winning journalistic career, including covering the collapse of the Soviet Union, the dirty war in Argentina. One of my favorite stories about Charles has to do with Bolivia. He wrote a story that was critical. Was it of the president? He and he was at his hotel, and the military showed up and arrested him. And as he's going out, he points to the maitre d' and says, in effect, call that number that I gave you. So now they take Charles off. They're interrogating him, and they want to know what his source is. And Charles was not going to tell him, so they said, give us your source. So he said no. And they pointed to this machine that they use that, you know, when placed on the soft parts of your body and, you know, cranked up, cause you to reconsider a no to a yes. And about the time they were going to do that, in came some higher-ranking military, whisked him away, took him back to the hotel where he was met probably by the only 2 people in Bolivia that were in a suit and tie from the CIA. But Charles had left the number of the embassy to call in case he did get arrested. And fortunately, it worked, and he survived that one. He then went on. You probably, those of you who are as old as I am, saw him on the NewsHour, the McNeil-Lehrer report, because he reported in front of the camera for many years from South America. So, with that, I had to make it brief because I could be up here a long time, but I have a rule about brevity in these matters. I give you Charles Krause, and for him to share his thoughts.
Thank you, Chris. Actually, my story begins in 2 places, I think. The first one is in Detroit, Michigan, when I was a teenager and my parents started collecting contemporary art. And one day, there was a black box that appeared on our living room wall, and that, very much like the one that you see there. And some of my boyhood friends who are here today may remember that. They used to kid me about it. But it was something that, it was a sculpture by Louise Nevelson, and it was something that I really came to love, and something that was sort of etched in my mind and has always remained there. And I think that's important, and I'll tell you why in a moment. The second place my story starts, I guess, is in Guyana. Chris has already gone over that pretty much, but I learned a lot from that experience. I mean, I learned one thing, that bullets are really very powerful, and when they hit you, you never will forget that feeling. And given all of the semi-automatic weapons that are floating around now, I think it's just something to keep in mind that whatever you may think about things, all of those guns could really create some serious problems in this country. But let me take it in a different direction. What I also learned in Jonestown was the dangers of charismatic leaders, of demagogues like Juan Perón, for example, charismatic leaders like Jim Jones, autocrats, caudillos, tin pot dictators, and generally just people who think they know everything, listen to no one. These people usually, from my experience over a course of 20-some years covering wars and revolutions around the world, they usually run their countries into the ground, and they always do whatever they can to silence or at least discredit the people who are critical of them. Guyana was like that. Argentina was like that, where I was based. Nicaragua, where I covered the revolution. The Philippines, where I interviewed Marcos shortly before he left town. And the Soviet Union, where I also spent quite a bit of time. And what I can tell you is that, you know, there is a kind of dynamic of social and political change and upheaval that becomes, after a while, you begin to look for certain things and you begin to find them if that's what the situation is. And while I don't want to be overly dramatic, there's some very troubling things going on right now, and I think that everyone should be aware of them. What was more positive about all of the traveling and reporting that I did is that there were artists who were often right there trying to, and often having influence over the course and the dynamic of social and political change. They created images like that one, which, if you look carefully, you'll see is not very complimentary of communism. And of course, that was created while the Soviet Union was still in existence, and that artist, who I know personally, took a great risk by creating an image like that, but he did. And it was that kind of courage and these kind of images that often helped undermine or change the political situation for the better. And that is really, these two observations of mine, one having to do with the way an image stays in your mind. If it's something that impresses you for one reason or another, it really stays there and you don't forget it. And the second is that art really can make a difference in terms of making things better. I generally think that's usually what happens. But in any case, artists have a way of seeing the future and are often very brave in trying to express it in their work. And that's what the Center for Contemporary Political Art is going to be all about. We're going to enlist the talent and creativity of America's artists to create a new genre of politically engaged art, which we're calling the art of civic engagement. It is going to be art that is going to be informed by public opinion research. We're going to try to figure out ahead of time what images and what messages and what facts need to be communicated that will change people's minds about things. People in this country, I think, now are just very confused. They don't know, a lot of people don't know who to believe or what to believe. And of course, those who believe that, you know, a nativist philosophy is what's good for the country, I think a lot of them, you know, they may believe that, and they, you know, I won't judge their reasons, but a lot of it's based on misinformation, I think, and information that if they knew more, if they knew better, maybe it would help change their minds. And that's what I'm hoping we can do with this center that we're going to create. A drawing like this one, I want to tell you a little story, but this is a drawing that I showed started my own private gallery some years ago. And this is by an artist named Anatol Zuckerman, who was actually born in Russia, emigrated to the United States. And a couple years ago, during the primary period of the 2015, Anatol and I decided we were going to submit this drawing to the post office, which has this custom stamp program. And we thought we'd have a stamp made out of this, and we would use it for mailing out things and promotion or one thing or another. But when he submitted it, they said no. They said it was too political. But at the same time, they were printing Cruz for President stamps. They were printing Bush for Texas stamps. They were doing all kinds of things that seemed to us to be political. I mean, if this was too political, why was that okay? And one thing led to another, and I spoke to Chris about it, and Chris decided that his law firm would take this case as a pro bono case, and we're now in the U.S. District Court of the District of Columbia, and I think we're going to win. I'm sure we're going to win in some way, but they've already changed the rules. The post office has already done all kinds of things. But the point is that art really can make a difference. It depends if you use it right or if you figure out how to use it. And people respond to it. I know when I was a journalist, I couldn't speak the language in a lot of the countries that I was reporting from, but I could see, and I could see what they were saying in the art that they were showing on the walls or clandestinely, to me or to others. But the point is, art can make a difference. And I think now, if ever there was a time, now is the time in this country. And so our purpose is to encourage civil engagement by average Americans for the good governance, for a good governance and a more just society for the common good of all Americans. And I think that's what we stand for. That's what we're going to try to do with the art. And I hope that, I just hope we'll be able to do it. If you question whether fine art and images can influence public opinion, take a look at what's back there. Kathleen Ramage's assemblage, Bigot Proof Vest, Michael's paintings, two of them back there. And also take a look at this video, which I think 6 months from now, 8 months from now, just see if you don't remember these images, if somebody mentions bigotry or guns. So, Michael, I wonder if you just stand up. I think people should know who you are. And I think I'd just all like to thank you all for coming today. We're going to go on with the...
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So I carried my first picket sign when I was 8 years old in the 1960s, and God knows I've been carrying one ever since, I think. I grew up with artists and educators and learned really early on the power of words and images and art. And what you've heard Chris and Charles talk about and what we are hoping to accomplish through the work of the center is really exciting and really it's big, and we know we can't do it alone, and we know the importance of partnering and collaborating inside Washington and outside, all throughout the country. And Mel Hardy, who's also on our board, is going to talk very, very briefly about those partnerships. And then after Mel speaks, I'd like to introduce, there are some other board members here, and then really look forward to hearing your questions and your feedback. We are looking for advice from you and feedback and hard questions. We've done several informal and formal conversations, and the advice and the insights that we've gotten from people who have opened their homes and given us time has been really, really helpful to us in refining what it is we're doing, how we're articulating it, and ultimately what we hope to achieve. We know what that is, but we want to make sure everybody else understands and is excited about it as we are. So, Mel? Oh, you tricked me there.
So thank you very much. What we know is that across this nation, there are many people who consider themselves to be artists. Across the geographic spectrum of the United States, in every community that we find people, there are many who consider themselves to be art makers. In the matter of how we communicate with these teeming numbers of artists, the center is one who will use social science research and polling data to take the temperature of the United States and take that data along the themes and present it for artist calls so that artists can respond to those themes given what the nation feels about particular topics. We think that the matter of engaging with artists and the creative class who can articulate ideas that we need to be the foot soldiers in this civic engagement art is amongst the most important things that we can do. And we are reaching out to communities across the country, replete with these vast numbers of artists and creative types who are interested in aligning themselves with assessing the temperature of America as it exists today. And that artwork will be the focus of our engagement with all Americans across the country. So the matter of coalition building with the creative class is a principal foundation of what the Center for Contemporary Political Art is. We need your engagement with it. We need you to tell your friends about it. We need your support to help it propagate to those communities that you know can influence the course of real social and political change, resting on the primacy and prowess of our creatives in our nation to help us with this very important work of political and social change.
Okay, Charles mentioned Kathleen Ramick. Kathleen, you want to wave? Kathleen is a very talented artist on our board. And if you haven't had a chance to go see her vest in the back, it's pretty extraordinary. So please do talk with Kathleen about that. And I can't see, but Judy Greenberg, are you here? Oh, there's Judy is on our board. Judy was, for several decades, director of the Krieger Museum, a fabulous museum in Washington, D.C., and has a wealth of experience with shows and museums, and has just been a wonderful addition to our board. And Dr. Michael Hodgson was greeting everybody as you came in, is up front here. He's treasurer of our board. And then we have two individuals who were not able to be with us this evening. But we hope you'll have a chance to talk with all of us informally. But for right now, we do have some microphones. You guys don't have to do anything. These guys will turn yours on. But ask us questions, push back, give us advice. What can we share? What can we learn from you? Any questions? Don't be shy. We can take it. Yes. You can just talk.
Is this on?
Yeah.
Okay, well, one of these days, I mean, our goal, our hope is that we'll be able to begin work next September. We have to raise some money to do that, and we're not there yet, so there is no place to exhibit art at this point, but there will be. And certainly one of the things that we've talked about, and these open call shows will be open to any artist in the country. So we're going to send out a call saying that we would like art that has to do with X, and then any artist will submit work that who wants to, and then we'll have a jury of art experts who will look at the works and choose. I've done 3 of these shows over the past several years, and they actually work well. And in fact, I mean, the artists who are here now are all artists who I met as a result of these open call shows. So that's one thing. We've also talked about going to a school, a high school, or, you know, where there is an arts program, and working with the kids in order to have an exhibit of their work in Washington and online. So, you know, I would certainly think that if we can get this going, sometime in the next year or so, we'll be doing something like that. Well, I mean, we're you know, it's the way the world works, but no, I mean, I think every one of us who's involved in this has used our own personal funds, and we will continue to do that. But at some point, you know, we can't fund this whole thing, and we are going to need to have some support. Yeah.
Let me also just add to that, please. The vision is for some real bricks and mortar, significantly, that captures the imagination of the curatorial class to help us understand that this contemporary non-propagandist art for political and social change also has its merit in our society today. That bricks and mortar is important. We think it's a statement, especially in Washington, where we have such an infrastructure for art presentations, but this is a special purpose organization, distinct in the nation, that is engaging art for civic engagement. Civic art for civic engagement. That's a really powerful line when you think about it. So we really would enjoy the benefit of engaging with you and your organization in Southern Jersey. I go on these listening tours through the Midwest just to hear what people are thinking about, because there are artists there, and they are engaged also, but we're not listening to them in Washington for the most part. But that's our purpose.
Right here.
Could you just talk about the specifics of what the center would be? It's located in DC, I take it. And then what else would, apart from a space to exhibit art, it sounds as if you would have a research team as well?
Yes.
Yeah, so the way this would be envisioned, or the way it is envisioned, is think of it this way. We start with what we're calling our design incubator. So there is an issue that we're concerned with that's of contemporary urgency. Let's take gun violence or gun control, gun safety. So, you know, there's different ways, different terms. There's a lot of social scientists out there that we are starting to talk with who are interested in working with us. We want to do some very some methodology, some research where we're getting input on what words matter, what symbols matter for different communities, different people outside Washington, outside the East Coast, what resonates, what's important. We take the learnings from that social science in our design incubator, we're calling it. We incorporate those learnings into the open call or the call for art. The notice goes out, the art comes in, it's juried. Artwork is displayed in the bricks and mortar because it really is all of our thought that to really appreciate and be respectful of the artist, one has to view the art up close in real time in its place. From there, we are going to reach out to organizations and advocacy groups. We are a C3 organization, so there's some things we can do and there are some things we're prohibited from doing. But the advocacy organizations can take these images and use it to communicate with their groups, through online, through whatever means they have to distribute to their networks, and they can take it out to the people and use it. And Malin is listening tours, and Judy Greenberg, many of our board members are identifying potential partners and organizations with whom we can partner to take this art and make sure it is out there and it is used as broadly as we can help to push it out. So
Let me just add one thing.
yeah.
Symbols, one of the things that I learned as a journalist were that symbols are really important. The solidarity symbol, logo, which you saw, which Chris talked about, really did have an enormous impact on events in Poland that led to the collapse of the Soviet Union and all the rest of it. But American NGOs don't seem to really understand that. Many of them don't have easily identifiable symbols, and so one of the things that I'm hoping the design incubator that we were talking about will do, it will create a kind of visual language of change, which will be universally recognized symbols that will immediately trigger recognition of certain ideas or certain groups. I've made the point in other places that, our two political parties, their symbols, one is a jackass and the other one is an elephant. And if you think about it, they may be accurate, they may be appropriate, but on the other hand, they're not very imaginative and they're not very inspirational. And I think that they can do better and will do better for the groups that we want to help.
In the back, please.
Yes, I'm sort of getting this existentially. I'm getting a mixed message. I'm not sure whether the primary thing is affecting change or supporting artists. I went to a presentation last Thursday in which the leaders led off while we were sleeping, talking about the baby boomers, etc., and 38,000 people died by gun in a year, and 300 million weapons are in the hands of the nation. I don't hear anything about reaching out. He said this next generation, it's going to take a consistent, sacred work to get the opposition who's laser focused against us. I don't hear anything about social platforms.
Oh,
We have to reach out more than reaching in. I'm of the certain age that we all are, and that we need some youth and going into schools. It's the 17-year-olds that are carrying this. And of course, iconic photographs like Kent State over the body of the dead person, the lieutenant shooting a person in Vietnam, and going all the way back to Thomas Nast, they all brought down corruption or changed views. So I support the effort, but I'm just getting a mixed message of what we're doing.
So as far as young people, that is absolutely a top priority. Actually, on April 8th, we're doing a focus group with a number of young people specifically. It's all a matter of how you define young people. We're defining them as 17 to 30 for broad range, but we are doing a pretty lengthy series of focus groups. We do have young people working with us. We do have social channels. They are live, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. We have online donations on all of them. And we do understand the power of the social platform. So along with everything we've talked about, there is a concerted effort to have a very robust digital presence. We have to do all of that together. And there's no question, just look today, all the kids that walked out of school, the shoes on the lawn. I mean, many of us know, looking at shoes, what that story is about. And it's just unbelievable that we're having to use shoes of dead people again. Like, what is going on? So really powerful, big reminders. We are all about getting young people.
And I would just add that the bricks and mortar part of this, in part, is because artists, that's an incentive for them. They, as much as how important the social media is, artists would like to have people actually see their work. And so offering the opportunity for them to show their work in Washington is really one of the incentives that we can offer them. And so, you know, you shouldn't confuse it. Maybe we weren't quite clear about why we're doing it, but that's a large part of it.
Yes, over here.
Good evening. My name is Judith LeBlanc, and I'm the director of the Native Organizers Alliance, and I'm a member of the Caddo Tribe of Oklahoma. But don't be fooled, I do have a Boston accent. So I'm one of those Indians who walk with a high heel on one foot and a moccasin on the other. And I think the question about is it artists or is it responding to political developments was very much answered during Standing Rock. Because Standing Rock and what happened around the Dakota Access Pipeline actually gave a mission to artists, and there was so much art that was created at the Osheti-Shikung camp that we organized, and there was so much relevance to creating art as symbols for example, water is life. That is a sacred Dakota principle that now most people will understand no matter where you are in the country. It is something that people grasp. So my question is this. What is the strategy to reach out to movements, especially in a magic movement moment like Standing Rock? What is the strategy to reaching out to movements that thrust forward our best artists from, for example, Native communities? How is it that you're going to guarantee that vital connection, like Solidarity Nos? Water is life is like that. It's a symbol. And so many movements and the work that we do in Indian country, there are so many artists that are a part of our movements. How will you ensure that people of color, rural communities are represented in the work that you do?
Well,
Let me take a crack at that, Judith. So, a big piece of this event tonight is connecting with you. We need to know who you are, otherwise it would just fall fallow. So with our connection, folks, we're already connected. This girlfriend over here. So with our connection, it is important that we find ourselves in coalition together. That's the nature of so much of the work that I seek to do, is to build those broader coalitions that have meaning to the work that we do together. There's so much simpatico in many of these works. You're talking about First Nations people, a kind of circumscribed group of Americans in this nation that we find lie outside of the American imagination. How do we bring that forward? That's our task. And your being here tonight, thank you, is important in that connection. We want to be in solidarity with you.
We're also, from just a practical standpoint, working very hard to put together. We work closely in DC with lots of umbrella organizations, advocacy organizations. We're expanding our lists, our reach, and working really hard to make sure in each of those segments, cross-cutting and siloed, that we're getting the right groups. So we're starting to build up our databases to make sure, and then obviously going out and making sure we don't have any gaps and we're not missing. We're just thinking inside that bubble, and how do we go beyond that? So we really are practically looking at building that network. I think there were some questions on this side. Over here, please.
Yes, Mr. Hardy, you refer to a non-propagandist art, and my question is, how do you, in an organization that's promoting art in the service of political ends or social ends, how do you make the distinction or preserve the notion of art that's not propaganda? How does it avoid becoming propaganda, assuming, of course, that that's the true dichotomy and not a false dichotomy?
can I just
Please.
say something? Yeah, first of all, propaganda can be defined in different ways, but to some extent, propaganda is when a government or some organization kind of pays people or forces them to create art or create images that they may not personally believe in, but they have no choice, maybe. None of the art that we're going to show, none of it, is going to be paid for. I mean, we're going to open you know, we're going to have calls which will offer any artist the opportunity to submit work, but we're not going to, you know, pay anyone to submit work, and we're not going to force them to. And furthermore, if we discover that somebody else is paying them to do it, which is something that I've actually worried about, we'll make sure that art will all be not considered, because any art that is, you know, comes into us as propaganda, and to me, the propaganda part of it comes in when it's being, the motivation for it is not the motivation of the artist, it's the motivation of someone else or something else. So Mel may want to say a few words about it, but I don't see this as being propaganda, and we are going to be very careful about that.
Do you think of it as a matter just of conflict of interest and
Well, I think that's
mostly as a motivational issue, not a curatorial matter?
well, I mean, you know, as a curatorial matter, I think you have to be able to figure out what it is that you're dealing with, number one. And number two, we are not going to, we don't, you know, I was a journalist for a long time. This business about alternative facts that they sort of have come up with, we're not going to be having art based on alternative facts. We're going to be having art that's based on at least a legitimate opinion based on real facts. And so, you know, I think that also speaks to the issue of propaganda or what we're going to be showing.
Let me also say, I'll quote Toni Morrison in 2008. She says, "All good art is political. And those that say that their art is not political believe in the status quo."
There you go. I think you had a question. Please.
It seems to me that we're living in a society that's almost dulled.
Hang on one. Can everybody hear, or do we need a microphone? The video guys need the mic. Okay.
We're living in a society that's almost dulled by the current political climate.
Speak to the mic, please.
Dulled by the current political climate. And so the challenge to me is exactly what you presented at the beginning, and that is, how can you put forward what particular issues you're going to focus on? Because having artists in the family, I know the truth of what you say, and that is there has to be a brick and mortar component to this. There has to be, in order to attract the best of the artisans. So the question simply is, how can you refine the issues that you're going to say will command your attention? This will be what you're asking us to contribute to. Now, these will be the CCP issues of the next 5 years, okay? Or 2 years even.
Well, I mean, that's certainly a valid question. And I'll answer it this way. I was trying to put together a book of some kind, and we will do that and send it to everyone who's here. About the, I put, at my gallery, has put together something like 22 or 23 shows over the past 5 years. And I think that you will be able to get a sense of what the issues are that are of interest to us. And also, part of the reason why we don't want to commit ourselves to, you know, we've committed ourselves to doing 14 exhibits over the next 3 years. But what those exhibits will deal with will to some extent be determined by what is going on in this country. And maybe because I was a journalist for so long and worked on deadline and kind of, you know, my sense has to do with what's happening now. You know, if you try to plan shows 2 and 3 years in advance, they're not going to be of the moment. And I think that's what's missing. I think that's what we can do, but I also think it makes it difficult to tell you what we're going to do 2 years from now. On the other hand, really this notion of good governance for a more just society, for the common good of all Americans, is really what encapsulates what we're trying to do. So,
Okay, Brian, I think you had a question.
Yes, Charles and Robin, I'm curious as to the issue of needing to get polling data to help direct this. I mean, aren't artists supposed to be the pulse of what's going on in the country? And I don't know if artists would respond well to the idea of being supplied polling data and said this is what you should be looking at or thinking about. I think you can find artists that are doing this, and in respect to the idea as well as the brick and mortar, there's a lot of art going on that doesn't require brick and mortar. It's projection art. It's a lot of work that is more public in orientation rather than a building to go to, which is very difficult to organize people to just to come to it. And finding other venues beside it. It's not to say brick and mortar is a bad idea. It's just that I think there are other venues that a lot of this could be done, but I'm more curious about the need for polling data, and would money be spent better on other things rather than on looking at polling data?
Well, let me respond to that. The idea isn't to give artists a bunch of polling data and say, here, make a drawing out of this. The idea is that in order to have political art that is actually effective, that actually will maybe change people's minds, not just make the artist feel good. The thought came to me because of some work that I've done that you can learn a lot about messaging and about what really changes people's minds by doing focus groups and doing other things. We're not saying that any artist has to do something specific. What we're going to throw out is an idea, an idea. It may be based on, instead of it just being based on what we happen to come up with one night when we're, had a little too much to drink and decide, okay, fine, let's just go do that. We're going to actually be a little more methodical about it. But no artist, if they don't agree with it, has to respond. Presumably, they'll be responding to messages or calls that they believe in, or we hope so. That would be the idea. I've done 3 of these exhibits. You've been involved in a lot of different things like this. It doesn't really matter whether it's just something that comes out of somebody's head because they read the newspaper the day before, or that they've actually done a little bit of research to figure out what actually might work. I don't know.
And as to the bricks and mortar, can you hear me okay? Okay. Bricks and mortar, the other reason is we envision doing salons and discussions and so forth, and while obviously we can stream that and do Facebook Live and all of that, being able to talk across from people in person is we found it to be a very meaningful use of everybody's time. So that would invite the ability to do that. But I did want to respond also to your question about how we pick topics. I know for the first open call, we already have one in the works, and for many of them, and Charles can reveal that, but really looking to react to some extent to what's going on in real time. And that really is one of the differentiations for the work that we're doing at the center. And I'm going to ask Judy Greenberg to talk a little bit. Judy, who was with a museum, many museums are doing quote-unquote political art, so what are we doing that's different, and why is what we're doing a little bit different? And that speaks to what issues, whether you're reflecting back to the civil rights, looking backwards, or we're looking forwards on issues like immigration, gun violence, income inequality, corruption of Congress, gun safety, and what's happening in the White House. Judy.
Thank you, Robin. Well, first I might add that this afternoon I was taking a walk on Central Park, and what did I see? I saw a bunch of kids screaming with posters against guns. And I have to tell you, I wanted to well up and cry because it was so amazing. My feeling, and I got involved with this organization because I retired as of June 1st, 2017. I was the director of the Krieger Museum for, oh my God, like a long time. I actually opened it as a museum in 1994. And I felt so frustrated with what's going on in this world, not even the world, going on in this country, that it just sickened me. And I got a call from Robin that they were doing something up in the Berkshires and wanted to introduce me to it. All she had to say was political art. And I thought, this is interesting. So here I am, a retired lady. In September, I have a meeting with Charles and Robin, and I thought, this is really amazing. And I think the questions that are coming up are great. There are a few things I wanted to mention. Being in the museum world, when you're doing an exhibition, you're planning 2, 3, sometimes 4, 5 years ahead. We're not doing that. We're doing what's current because we have to. Because if we don't, in 2 or 3 years, it might be too late. And we don't want to be too late. So we want to get the word out. And I have to tell you, these kids are fabulous. And with these kids getting the word out and what they want, we're going to be getting the word out and what we want. We also want to, and I've spoken to some of the museum directors in D.C., I'm from D.C., with the idea of having, they can't have political shows necessarily, especially, I mean, they do have political shows, but they don't necessarily deal with what's going on right here at this moment. But what they do have are panel discussions. Therefore, we can engage various institutions to have discussions with artists, with curators, with others, and you're reaching out to the community, not just in Washington. In New York, the new museum does fabulous things here down on the Bowery, the Whitney, MoMA. We're going to be tapping into them if anybody is sitting here from the Whitney or MoMA, whatever. But it's getting the word out, and also the exhibitions that we're having. I mean, we're talking, for example, this one painting that was done has been put into a poster. That poster that's sitting on the table, they were going to have, what, 500, 600 of them? They're going to be handed out on March 24th at the March in Washington. So, I mean, it's getting it out, and it's not just, and it's artist talk, you know, image talks, the swastika talks. So we want to talk, and we want to make a difference. And whatever's going on now, we want to change it. And whatever's going to go on in the future, artists should be able to communicate about that too. So this is where we are, and I think it's a great group, and I hope you folks are going to be interested in being involved in some capacity. So thank you.
Thank you. Probably have time for 1 or 2 more thoughts, questions. Yes, please.
Yes, I may be one of the only ones who's not from either New York City or Washington, D.C. I live in Asheville, North Carolina, and...
Kathleen's from North Carolina.
Okay, hi. So, I can just tell you, after having lived there for a long time, that it's a different place than Washington, D.C. and New York City. There's not that many people that are appalled by what's going on. And if you want to talk about civic engagement, those are the ones you need to be engaging with, not with each other.
Exactly. That's the point of the focus groups out of Washington and in the real world. And
so, Mel,
understanding
you can come to
what
Asheville
resonates.
if you want.
Exactly.
We have a great art community, and you know, we're the birthplace of Black Mountain College Art Museum, which is the foundation of the American modern art movement. So if you would like to come, I'd be glad to host you and arrange something for it. But I mean, even in Asheville, we're the liberal ones compared to North Carolina.
There are so many oases in what we call, you know, this broad, you know, middle or the south. There's so many of these oases. You know, I talked about my listening tour recently in October, September, October. I was in the Twin Cities, but traveled down to Lanesboro, Minnesota, south of the Mayo Clinic in Rochester. Population 700.
Oh my God. Apartment buildings with more people.
8 galleries for 700 people. 2, you know, music halls and theaters for 700 people. So when you talk about, our nation has the creative class amongst us, and that cohort of our fellow citizens, we need to engage across the political spectrum of thought. And engaging them is engaging Americans. And that's That's our purpose.
How about one more to drive it home? Anybody brave? Yes, right in front. You win.
Okay. So I am teaching at the Tisch School of the Arts at NYU. And one of the things that they are focused on, or pockets of the university is focused on, the arts part of the university, is political, how artists become engaged in the public dialogue. So I just wonder whether or not, instead of creating the wheel again, whether or not instead of spending resources trying to do research, that you tap into existing facilities where that thought and that research is going on, and what artists are looking for are means for their works to be seen, right? And I concur with the gentleman behind me about the diversity. Don't just think in terms of fine art or graphic art, because every form of art, from music to dance to public displays, et cetera, have the capacity to move people and carry be in response to or express powerful ideas. And so I just want to encourage you to expand the idea, and then possibly you would be the amalgamator of ideas and a central clearinghouse and an impetus for people an incentivizer where young artists have a place where their work could be shown outside of their individual communities around the country, where it might be exposed to a bigger audience. And that way you have entree to the various institutions, and you have are providing a really remarkable service. So,
You know, Harry, what I'm not entirely sure of, based on what you just said, is whether we've adequately explained kind of what we're trying to do. I mean, we're not, we're happy that universities and other places are looking for ways to get more engaged with, society. And we're just trying to, but we're in Washington, and there is a certain value, perhaps, of showing art and reaching out to all the different groups that are there and our Congress and all the rest of them. But we're going to show art that comes in from all over the place. And so we're not ourselves creating art, and we're asking the Tisch School and our artists from NYU and wherever else they to submit work if they would like to. And we will, once we get going, of course we want to have relationships with other organizations, other places, but until we get going, it's a little bit difficult to what are we going to do? I mean, so tonight is really the beginning of trying to reach out to different people in different places and to say, look, this is what we hope to do, and tell us if you know anybody or anything that we should be aware of or should be aware of what we're trying to do. Tell us about it. We're happy to have that information, but you have to start somewhere, and this is where. And as far as dance and theater and all the rest of it, yeah, one day it would be wonderful to think that there'll be a Kennedy Center for Political Art where they'll have stages and theaters. But at the moment, there's nothing. So, I'm just afraid if we start too big, we're never going to be able to do anything. So we're starting where we can, and I hope we can expand.
We have talked about exploring the possibility on a case-by-case basis of some partnerships. So if there's a research component where it makes sense, either with a foundation or a university who's already has a survey in the field and we can add to it, obviously we would look at levels of efficiencies that make sense to be able to do that, but not to lose the independence of what it is that we're trying to do through the center. And I think there probably will be opportunities to do just that. I think there was another question. In the back? In the very, very back? Have I missed anybody all the way back there who's being shy? Okay, Michael.
Yes, I just would like to hope that you also include some older artists also.
Over 30? Okay.
Robin,
Okay.
may I?
Yes,
Speak to something?
Kathleen.
We are age blind, as you know. When the works come in, we have no idea where they, who they are, how old they are, or anything else. And believe me, that's the way it is.
I'd just like to say that as an artist from North Carolina, Charles Gallery has been a godsend. I mean, there are not that many places throughout the country where you are able to say what you want to say and not worry about somebody's patron that might not like this, someone's board that might not like this, having to soft pedal it. I've had 2 pieces censored, not by Charles, but elsewhere. There are not a lot of galleries doing this, I can tell you for a fact. They will do a political show about pollution. They will do a political show about something that happened in Germany in the 30s. They will do something safe. They will not take our government to task for the most part. In many cases, they have to rely, or they do rely, on very wealthy donors. Those donors, some of them, are taking over the institutions that are the bedrock of this country, including our colleges and universities. Wake Forest University, in what is now my hometown, just got like $60 million from the Koch brothers. They are not going to show political art that doesn't agree with the Koch brothers. And they have involved themselves in over 150 universities in this country because they know that's where the learning takes place, and that's where the status quo gets challenged. So, as a political artist, I am so grateful to have found Charles and had the opportunity to be able to say something that may not have been considered politically correct. And it's all the more important now. I mean, time is of the essence. Sinclair just bought 120 more TV stations, and they're going to be canning spam to send, national spam to send to all these local stations and pan it off as local news. We don't have a lot of time to wait around if we're going to, stand up. And art has the ability to transcend some of those cultural differences, some of those language barriers, some of those ideological barriers. People will be taking it in, be engaged before they even realize they shouldn't agree with it. And I've had people who tell me, I'm a conservative, but I just love those caricatures you did of McCain and Palin. So you can reach through, especially if you use satire, you use humor, you use things that they identify with from childhood. So I just want to say thank you.
Thank you. All right. You want to wrap it up? So we're getting the high sign. Grab one more drink, or anyway, let us know if you have other questions. There's information how to reach us, and really appreciate your taking some time and spending your evening with us. Thank you, everyone.
Yes, of course. Phyllis is husband. Yeah, I know Bob. Yeah, and I know Peter.